Maya stayed on the ground, her hands visible, knowing any sudden movement might make things worse. Officer Daniels stood over her, his face twisted with anger that seemed to come from somewhere deep and personal. "I told you people to stay in your own neighborhoods," he spat, reaching for his handcuffs. "Driving fancy cars you didn't earn." "My wallet has my business cards," Maya said calmly despite her racing heart. "My driver's license matches the address I gave you. Please just check." Officer Daniels laughed. "Right, and I'm supposed to believe you own a tech company. Did you steal that ID too?" Maya had built her company from nothing, working 18-hour days for years. She'd overcome poverty, doubt, and countless closed doors because of her gender and skin color. Now, lying on the pavement outside her own home, none of that seemed to matter. "I have the right to make a phone call," Maya tried again. "Shut up." The officer kicked her phone further away when she glanced at it. "You reaching for something? You got a weapon?" "No, sir," Maya said, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. She'd learned long ago that showing fear around dangerous people only made things worse. Justice Williams moved closer, taking in every detail. The officer's body camera was on. She could see the red light blinking. Good. She watched Maya's careful movements, noting how the woman remained calm despite the clear injustice happening. "Officer," Justice Williams called out, her voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Daniels turned, annoyed at the interruption. "Ma'am, please step back. Police business." Justice Williams approached anyway, her walking shoes making soft sounds on the pavement. "I've been watching for several minutes. Why is this woman on the ground?" "She was resisting." "I saw no resistance," Justice Williams cut in. "I saw you kick a cooperative citizen to the ground. Your body camera should confirm my observation." Officer Daniels finally looked at the older woman properly. Her clothes were expensive but simple, and something about her bearing made him hesitate. "This is a police matter. Please continue your walk." "I am Justice Eleanor Williams of the Supreme Court," she said, her voice level. "And I believe I'm exactly where I need to be right now." The officer's face went from red to pale. His mouth opened, then closed. "Now," Justice Williams continued, "would you like to help this lady to her feet, or shall I?" Maya looked up, hardly believing what she was hearing. A Supreme Court justice. Here? Officer Daniels didn't move, so Justice Williams extended her hand to Maya. "Here, my dear, let me help you." Maya accepted the help, wincing as she stood. Her hip throbbed where she hit the pavement. "Officer Daniels," Justice Williams read his name tag, "I believe we need your supervisor here immediately. And please be advised that I'll be following this incident closely." The officer stuttered something about procedure, his confidence evaporating. "I've been watching long enough to know procedures weren't followed," Justice Williams said. She turned to Maya. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "I'll be all right," Maya said, brushing dirt from her jeans. "Thank you for stopping." "Your name, dear?" Justice Williams asked. "Maya Johnson." Recognition flashed in the judge's eyes. The Connect World founder. "I read about your clean water initiative in Africa last month." Officer Daniels' eyes widened as he finally realized who he'd been harassing. Maya nodded. "That's me. I just bought a house here last month. I was driving to get groceries when..." She gestured to the situation around them. Justice Williams turned back to the officer. "Call your supervisor now, please. We'll all wait together." As Officer Daniels reluctantly made the call, Maya retrieved her phone from the ground. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. She had the power to make one call and ruin this officer's career forever. She had friends in the media, in politics. She could make this national news by dinner time. But looking at the officer's now worried face, Maya felt a different idea forming. Maybe there was a better way to handle this. One that might actually create change instead of just punishment. Justice Williams seemed to read her thoughts. "Sometimes the right path isn't the most obvious one," she said quietly. Maya nodded slowly, already thinking about what would happen next. As a police supervisor's car appeared in the distance, she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. This moment could become something bigger than one bad officer and one wronged woman. If she handled it right, maybe it could help others who didn't have a Supreme Court justice walking by at just the right moment. Maya stayed on the ground, her hands visible, knowing any sudden movement might make things worse. Officer Daniels stood over her, his face twisted with anger that seemed to come from somewhere deep and personal. "I told you people to stay in your own neighborhoods," he spat, reaching for his handcuffs. "Driving fancy cars you didn't earn." "My wallet has my business cards," Maya said calmly despite her racing heart. "My driver's license matches the address I gave you. Please just check." Officer Daniels laughed. "Right, and I'm supposed to believe you own a tech company. Did you steal that ID too?" Maya had built her company from nothing, working 18-hour days for years. She'd overcome poverty, doubt, and countless closed doors because of her gender and skin color. Now, lying on the pavement outside her own home, none of that seemed to matter. "I have the right to make a phone call," Maya tried again. "Shut up." The officer kicked her phone further away when she glanced at it. "You reaching for something? You got a weapon?" "No, sir," Maya said, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. She'd learned long ago that showing fear around dangerous people only made things worse. Justice Williams moved closer, taking in every detail. The officer's body camera was on. She could see the red light blinking. Good. She watched Maya's careful movements, noting how the woman remained calm despite the clear injustice happening. "Officer," Justice Williams called out, her voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Daniels turned, annoyed at the interruption. "Ma'am, please step back. Police business." Justice Williams approached anyway, her walking shoes making soft sounds on the pavement. "I've been watching for several minutes. Why is this woman on the ground?" She was resisting. "I saw no resistance," Justice Williams cut in. "I saw you kick a cooperative citizen to the ground. Your body camera should confirm my observation." Officer Daniels finally looked at the older woman properly. Her clothes were expensive but simple, and something about her bearing made him hesitate. "This is a police matter. Please continue your walk." "I am Justice Eleanor Williams of the Supreme Court," she said, her voice level. "And I believe I'm exactly where I need to be right now." The officer's face went from red to pale. His mouth opened, then closed. "Now," Justice Williams continued, "would you like to help this lady to her feet, or shall I?" Maya looked up, hardly believing what she was hearing. A Supreme Court justice. Here? Officer Daniels didn't move, so Justice Williams extended her hand to Maya. "Here, my dear, let me help you." Maya accepted the help, wincing as she stood. Her hip throbbed where she hit the pavement. "Officer Daniels," Justice Williams read his name tag, "I believe we need your supervisor here immediately. And please be advised that I'll be following this incident closely." The officer stuttered something about procedure, his confidence evaporating. "I've been watching long enough to know procedures weren't followed," Justice Williams said. She turned to Maya. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "I'll be all right," Maya said, brushing dirt from her jeans. "Thank you for stopping." "Your name, dear?" Justice Williams asked. "Maya Johnson." Recognition flashed in the judge's eyes. "The Connect World founder. I read about your clean water initiative in Africa last month." Officer Daniels' eyes widened as he finally realized who he'd been harassing. Maya nodded. "That's me. I just bought a house here last month. I was driving to get groceries when," she gestured to the situation around them. Justice Williams turned back to the officer. "Call your supervisor now, please. We'll all wait together." As Officer Daniels reluctantly made the call, Maya retrieved her phone from the ground. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. She had the power to make one call and ruin this officer's career forever. She had friends in the media, in politics. She could make this national news by dinner time. But looking at the officer's now worried face, Maya felt a different idea forming. Maybe there was a better way to handle this, one that might actually create change instead of just punishment. Justice Williams seemed to read her thoughts. "Sometimes the right path isn't the most obvious one," she said quietly. Maya nodded slowly, already thinking about what would happen next. As a police supervisor's car appeared in the distance, she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. This moment could become something bigger than one bad officer and one wronged woman. If she handled it right, maybe it could help others who didn't have a Supreme Court justice walking by at just the right moment. The police supervisor, Captain Reynolds, arrived within minutes. His car pulled up smoothly beside Officer Daniels' vehicle, and he stepped out looking concerned but professional. Unlike Daniels, the captain seemed to take in the entire scene before making any judgments. "What's going on here?" he asked, his eyes moving from his officer to Maya and then widening slightly when they landed on Justice Williams. "Your officer pulled me over without cause," Maya explained calmly. "When I identified myself as the new owner of the Sullivan property, he refused to believe me, ordered me out of my car, and then kicked me to the ground when I tried to call my lawyer." Officer Daniels jumped in. "She was reaching for something, sir." "I thought it might be a weapon." "It was a phone," Justice Williams said. "I witnessed the entire incident, Captain. The woman was fully cooperative." Captain Reynolds nodded slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "Justice Williams, it's an honor to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He turned to Maya. "And you are?" "Maya Johnson," she said. "I moved to Pine Hills last month." The captain's eyebrows rose. "The tech entrepreneur? Connect World?" Maya nodded. "I use your app every day," he said, then caught himself, returning to professional mode. "Ms. Johnson, I apologize for any mistreatment. Would you like medical attention?" Maya shook her head. "Just some bruises. What I'd like is to understand why I was pulled over in the first place." All eyes turned to Officer Daniels, who suddenly found his shoes very interesting. "We received a call about a suspicious vehicle," he mumbled. "Someone who doesn't match the neighborhood profile." "And what profile would that be?" Justice Williams asked sharply. The silence that followed was answer enough. Maya brushed some remaining dirt from her pants. "Captain, I don't want to file a formal complaint." Officer Daniels' head snapped up, surprise written across his face. "You don't?" Captain Reynolds asked, equally confused. "No. What would that accomplish?" Maya looked directly at Officer Daniels. "You get suspended or fired. You'd be angry and resentful. Nothing would change except you'd lose your job and believe even more strongly that you were right." The officer stared back, speechless. Instead, Maya continued, "I'd like to propose something different. I want Officer Daniels to spend 2 weeks working with my foundation. We run programs in underserved communities. I think it would be educational." Captain Reynolds looked uncertain. "That's an unusual request." "Is it possible?" Justice Williams asked. "As community service or professional development?" The captain thought for a moment. "I suppose we could arrange something like that, if both parties agree." Officer Daniels finally found his voice. "You want me to work for you? After this?" "Not for me," Maya corrected, "with the foundation. With people who might help you see things differently. It's your choice. That or I file formal charges for assault, false detention, and civil rights violations." Justice Williams nodded approvingly. "Creative justice. I like it." A small crowd had gathered nearby, neighbors watching from a distance, some recording with their phones. Maya noticed and sighed. "This will be online soon," she said. "Better to get ahead of it." Captain Reynolds grimaced. "The department doesn't need another viral video." "Then accept my offer," Maya said. "Let's turn this into something positive." Officer Daniels looked from his captain to Maya to Justice Williams, then back to Maya. Something in his rigid posture seemed to give way slightly. "Why would you do this?" he asked. "Why not just ruin me?" "Because ruining you doesn't help anyone," Maya said simply. "Not you, not me, not the next person who gets pulled over for not matching the neighborhood profile." Justice Williams stepped closer. "Young man, I've spent my life interpreting the law. But laws alone don't change hearts. Ms. Johnson is offering you something rare. A chance to learn instead of merely being punished." The tension in the air was thick as Officer Daniels considered his options. Finally, he gave a small nod. "Fine. I'll do your program." Maya extended her hand. Then it settled. After a moment's hesitation, Officer Daniels shook it. Captain Reynolds looked relieved. "I'll need statements from everyone, and we'll need to formalize this agreement." As they sorted out the details, Maya's phone buzzed with a news alert. Someone had already uploaded video of the incident, and it was spreading fast. "You're about to become famous for something other than your technology," Justice Williams said quietly. Maya watched the neighbors with their phones, the officer looking uncomfortable, the captain trying to maintain order. This wasn't how she planned to use her influence, but maybe it was exactly where she needed to direct it. Sometimes the most important changes start in the most unexpected ways, she replied. And as the morning sun rose higher over Pine Hills, Maya knew that this confrontation was just the beginning of something much bigger than any of them had anticipated. By noon, the video had been viewed over 2 million times. Maya sat in her spacious kitchen, watching news reports about the incident on her tablet. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with calls from reporters, friends, and business associates. Ms. Johnson has declined to press charges against the officer involved, a news anchor reported. Instead, sources say she's proposed an alternative resolution that involves community service. Maya sipped her tea, wincing slightly from the pain in her ribs. The bruises were starting to darken, a physical reminder of the morning's events. Her assistant, Lee, was handling the flood of media requests, while Maya tried to process everything that had happened. The doorbell rang. Maya checked her security camera and was surprised to see Justice Williams standing on her doorstep, looking much more formal than she had that morning in her walking clothes. "Justice Williams," Maya greeted her, opening the door. "Please come in." The older woman stepped inside, taking in the modern but comfortable decor of Maya's new home. "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to check on you." "Not at all. Would you like some tea?" As they settled in Maya's living room with steaming cups, Justice Williams got straight to the point. "The video is everywhere. How are you handling it?" Maya placed her cup down carefully. "Honestly, I'm overwhelmed. This wasn't how I planned to become the face of police reform." "Few of us plan our defining moments," the justice said. "They tend to find us." Outside, more news vans had gathered at the neighborhood entrance. Maya had chosen this gated community partly for privacy, but now her address was public knowledge. "Captain Reynolds called me," Maya said. "Officer Daniels has agreed to the community service program. He starts next Monday at our youth center in Riverside." Justice Williams nodded approvingly. "You know, I've spent 50 years in the law. Most of that time, I believed strict punishment was the only answer to wrongdoing." She paused, looking thoughtful. "But lately, I've been wondering if there might be better ways to create real change." "Is that why you stopped this morning?" Maya asked. "I stopped because what I saw was wrong," the justice said simply. "But I stayed because I was curious about what you would do. Many people in your position would have demanded the officer's badge." Maya's phone buzzed again, the governor's office calling. She silenced it. "When I built my company," Maya said, "I faced discrimination at every turn. People assumed I couldn't code because of how I look. Investors would talk to my male employees instead of me, even after I became CEO." She rubbed her sore elbow absently. "I learned that changing minds is harder than changing policies, but both are necessary." Justice Williams smiled. "That's quite insightful." "My parents taught me that," Maya said. "My father was a high school teacher in a tough neighborhood. He always said punishment without education just creates resentment." A notification popped up on Maya's tablet, a breaking news alert. The police department had just released Officer Daniels' body camera footage. Both women leaned forward to watch. The footage was damning. Even with the official police camera angle, there was no mistaking the unnecessary force or the bias in the officer's words. Maya's calm demeanor throughout made the officer's aggression look even worse. "This changes things," Justice Williams said quietly. "The public reaction will be intense." As if on cue, Maya's phone lit up with a call from Captain Reynolds. She put it on speaker. "Ms. Johnson, we have a situation," the captain said, his voice tense. "There's a crowd gathering outside the police station. People are demanding Officer Daniels be fired immediately." Maya exchanged looks with Justice Williams. "What do you need from me, Captain?" "Your community service solution is looking less feasible by the minute," he admitted. "My superiors are talking about making an example of Daniels to calm the public." Justice Williams leaned forward. "Captain, this is Justice Williams. I'm with Ms. Johnson now. Before your department makes any decisions, I think we should consider the bigger picture." "Justice Williams." The captain sounded surprised. Yes, of course." "Give us an hour," Maya said. "I have an idea that might work better than sacrificing Officer Daniels to the mob." After ending the call, Maya turned to Justice Williams. I didn't expect things to escalate so quickly. That's how justice works these days, the older woman replied. Trial by social media, verdict in minutes, execution by public opinion. Maya stood up, her mind racing with possibilities. What if we could channel this energy into something constructive? Not just about one officer, but about changing the system. Justice Williams watched her with growing interest. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to use my platform for more than just technology, Maya said, reaching for her phone. And I could use your help. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Pine Hills as Maya Johnson and Justice Williams began crafting a response that would transform a single act of discrimination into a catalyst for genuine change. An hour later, Maya stood in her home office, camera equipment set up for a live statement. Justice Williams sat just off camera, reviewing notes they'd prepared together. The tension in the room was thick enough to touch. Are you sure about this? Maya's assistant Lee asked, adjusting the lighting. Once you go this route, there's no turning back. Maya nodded, checking her appearance one last time. She changed into a simple blue blouse, professional but approachable. Sometimes the hardest path is the right one. Social media was exploding with hashtags about the incident. Hashtag Justice for Maya and hashtag Fire Daniels were trending nationwide. Celebrities and politicians were weighing in, most calling for the officer's immediate termination. We'll live in 30 seconds, Lee warned, stepping behind the camera. Justice Williams gave Maya an encouraging nod. Remember, speak from the heart. The red light blinked on, and suddenly Maya was broadcasting to millions. Good afternoon, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. My name is Maya Johnson. By now, many of you have seen the video of me being assaulted by a police officer this morning. First, I want to thank everyone for their concern and support. She paused, taking a breath. The outpouring of anger on my behalf is understandable, but I'm asking you all to channel that anger differently. Officer Daniels was wrong. His actions were inexcusable and rooted in prejudice, but destroying his career won't fix the underlying problems that created this situation. Maya leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. I built my company on the belief that technology should connect people, not divide them. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Bridge Initiative, a new program that will bring police officers and community members together for mutual understanding and growth. She explained how the program would work: 2-week exchanges where officers would work in community centers while community leaders would observe police operations. Officer Daniels would be the first participant, but not the last. Justice Eleanor Williams of the Supreme Court has agreed to serve as our advisory chair, Maya continued, bringing her decades of legal experience to ensure our program creates meaningful change. The camera panned to show Justice Williams, who nodded solemnly. I'm asking the protesters at the police station to go home, Maya said. Your anger is justified, but we have an opportunity to build something better than retribution. I've spoken with Captain Reynolds, and the department has agreed to implement our program as a pilot for what we hope will become a national model. As she wrapped up the statement, Maya could see messages flooding in on her tablet. The initial reactions were mixed. Some praised her vision while others accused her of letting the officer off too easily. When the camera light turned off, Maya exhaled deeply. Do you think it worked? Justice Williams approached, resting a hand on Maya's shoulder. It was perfect, but this is just the beginning. Captain Reynolds called moments later. The crowd is dispersing, he reported. Your message got through. But there's something else. Officer Daniels wants to meet with you. Maya exchanged glances with Justice Williams. When? He's outside your gate now, the captain said. I came with him to ensure there wouldn't be any issues. After a moment's consideration, Maya agreed to the meeting. 20 minutes later, Officer Daniels sat stiffly in her living room, Captain Reynolds beside him, both looking uncomfortable amid the luxury. The officer appeared smaller somehow, his uniform no longer projecting the same authority it had that morning. His eyes were red-rimmed, his posture defeated. I watched your statement, he said, his voice rough. Why are you doing this? Why not just let them fire me? Maya studied him. Would that change anything? Would it make you understand why what you did was wrong? Officer Daniels looked down. My father was a cop. His father too. We were taught to control the situation, to be suspicious. He swallowed hard. I've never been called racist before. Yet your actions were textbook racial profiling, Justice Williams pointed out gently. I didn't see it that way, he admitted, not until I watched the video. Maya leaned forward. That's exactly why firing you solves nothing. The next officer would make the same assumptions because the system teaches those assumptions. For the first time, Officer Daniels looked directly at Maya. Your program, you really want me to be part of it? After what I did. Especially after what you did, Maya said firmly. Reform has to start somewhere. Why not with you? As the conversation continued, Maya's phone kept lighting up with notifications. The bridge initiative was now trending higher than calls for the officer's termination. Major companies were pledging support. The governor wanted to make it a statewide program. What had begun as a horrible morning was transforming into something unexpected, a chance to create actual change. Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, but as she looked at Officer Daniels' conflicted face and Justice Williams' hopeful expression, she knew this path, though difficult, was worth following. 2 weeks later, Maya stood at the back of the Riverside Youth Center, watching Officer Daniels play basketball with a group of teenagers. He looked different out of uniform, more human somehow in his t-shirt and sweatpants. The kids had been wary at first. A cop in their safe space wasn't exactly welcome. But after days of awkward interactions, something had begun to shift. He's actually pretty good, remarked Tanya, the center's director, coming to stand beside Maya. Yesterday he helped Diego with his math homework. Never thought I'd see that. Maya nodded, watching as a boy sank a three-pointer and Officer Daniels gave him a high five. How's he doing overall? Tanya shrugged. Started off rough. Kept to himself, defensive. But then Zoe asked him why cops always seemed scared of her neighborhood, and something clicked. They had a real conversation. The bridge initiative had exploded beyond anything Maya had imagined. What started as one officer's community service had morphed into a nationwide movement. Police departments from 5 states had contacted her about implementing similar programs. Corporate sponsors were lining up. Justice Williams had appeared on 3 major news shows discussing the constitutional implications of community-based police reform. Maya's phone buzzed, another media request. She silenced it and continued watching the game. You ever gonna talk to him again? Tanya asked. Or just keep observing from a distance? It was a fair question. Maya had intentionally kept her distance from Officer Daniels during his time at the center, letting him find his own way without feeling her watchful eyes. But his 2 weeks were almost up. Today, Maya decided, after the game. When the basketball session ended, the teenagers headed to the center's computer lab where Maya's foundation had installed new equipment last year. Officer Daniels wiped sweat from his forehead with a towel, then froze when he spotted Maya. Ms. Johnson, he said, suddenly formal despite his casual clothes. I didn't know you were here. Just checking in, Maya replied. Got a minute to talk. They walked to the center's small garden, a green oasis in the concrete neighborhood. Sitting on a bench, Maya noticed how Officer Daniels no longer avoided eye contact with her. Your 2 weeks are almost up, she said. How has it been? He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Hard. Humbling. He picked at a loose thread on his shirt. These kids, they've all had bad experiences with cops. Stories that sound like what I did to you. Except they didn't have a Supreme Court justice walking by. Maya nodded but said nothing, letting him continue. Diego told me he wants to be a lawyer because his brother got arrested for something he didn't do and nobody would listen. Officer Daniels shook his head. I used to hear stories like that and think, sure, that's what they all say. Now I wonder how many times I didn't listen. That's a powerful realization, Maya said. Captain Reynolds says I can have my badge back next week. Desk duty at first, then regular patrol eventually. He looked at Maya directly. But I'm not sure I should. That surprised her. Why not? What if I go back to being that same cop? What if all this wears off and I pull over the next black person driving through Pine Hills? It was the most honest thing he could have said, and Maya appreciated it. Change isn't a one-time event, Officer Daniels. It's a process. Call me Robert, he said, since we're talking like regular people now. Maya smiled slightly. The fact that you're worried about slipping back tells me you've already changed, Robert. The question is what you'll do with that change. From her bag, Maya pulled out a folder and handed it to him. The Bridge Initiative is expanding. We need officers who've been through the program to help train others. It would mean splitting your time between regular police work and working with us. Robert opened the folder, scanning the proposal. You want me to be the face of this? After what I did, sometimes our worst mistakes lead to our greatest contributions, Maya said. People will listen to you precisely because you made that mistake and learned from it. He closed the folder, looking thoughtful. Can I think about it? Of course. As they walked back inside, Maya's phone rang, Justice Williams calling. She answered as Robert went to get water. Turn on Channel 7, the justice said without preamble. The Senate Judiciary Committee just announced hearings on police reform legislation. They're calling it the Bridge Act, Maya. They want both of us to testify next month. Maya leaned against the wall, stunned. I never expected this to go so far so quickly. This is how change happens, Justice Williams said. Sometimes it takes decades, and sometimes it happens in an instant when the right spark meets the right kindling. As Maya ended the call, she watched Robert joking with one of the teenagers. 2 weeks ago, he'd kicked her to the ground because of the color of her skin. Today, he was finding common ground with kids from a neighborhood he would have previously just patrolled with suspicion. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete. But it was a beginning that Maya had never anticipated when she drove out for groceries that fateful morning. Sometimes the worst moments can lead to the most unexpected opportunities for change. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, Maya walked through the doors of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Camera flashes lit up around her as reporters shouted questions. Justice Williams walked beside her, the two women now linked in the public's mind as the unlikely duo behind the most significant police reform movement in decades. Ms. Johnson, how does it feel to see the Bridge Act about to pass? Justice Williams, has this experience changed your judicial philosophy? Maya smiled politely but kept walking. Today wasn't about press statements or sound bites. Today was the final vote on legislation that had grown from a single confrontation on a quiet suburban street. Inside the Senate chamber, Maya took her seat in the visitors' gallery. The room buzzed with energy as senators filed in for the historic vote. Across the aisle, she spotted Robert Daniels, no longer Officer Daniels. He had resigned from the police force 3 months ago to work full-time with the Bridge Initiative, traveling to police departments nationwide to share his story. He caught her eye and nodded respectfully. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could have imagined that first morning, not friendship exactly, but a partnership built on the understanding that they were now part of something much bigger than themselves. Nervous? Justice Williams whispered, settling beside Maya. A little, Maya admitted. I keep thinking about how all this started with me just wanting to get groceries. The justice smiled. The most important journeys often begin with the most ordinary steps. The Bridge Act had gone through countless revisions and heated debates. It wasn't perfect, no legislation ever is, but it represented real progress. Mandatory community immersion training for police officers, civilian oversight boards with actual power, funding for programs that brought officers and community members together as people rather than as uniforms and statistics. The gallery fell silent as the voting began. Maya watched the electronic tally board as numbers climbed. When the final vote was announced -61 to 39 in favor, the gallery erupted in applause. Maya closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by emotion. Justice Williams squeezed her hand. You did this, the older woman said. Your choice to seek understanding instead of vengeance made all the difference. After the vote, Maya found herself in a small reception room with senators, activists, and police representatives. Robert approached, looking more comfortable in a suit than she would have expected. Congratulations, he said, though it feels strange to congratulate someone for something that started with me assaulting them. Maya shook her head. The assault was just the match. The kindling was already there, all the people who'd experienced what I did but didn't have my resources or platform. Or a Supreme Court justice out for a morning walk, Robert added with a hint of a smile. A young aide approached, informing them the president was ready for the photo opportunity. As they walked toward the Oval Office, Robert spoke quietly. I visited my old precinct yesterday. Things are changing slowly. The new training programs are making a difference. And the officers? How do they feel about it? Maya asked. Mixed, he admitted. Some resist. Others are relieved to have new tools besides just force and fear. The younger ones especially. They passed through security and down the famous corridor. Maya thought about how far they'd come, not just in distance but in impact. Her tech company had connected millions of people online, but this work was connecting people across the real divides of race, power, and privilege. The president greeted them warmly, complimenting the extraordinary bipartisan achievement the Bridge Act represented. As cameras flashed capturing the moment, Maya found herself looking not at the president, but at the ordinary Americans who had been invited to witness the signing, mothers who had lost sons to police violence, officers who had lost colleagues in the line of duty, community leaders who had worked decades for this moment. Later that evening, Maya stood on the balcony of her hotel room overlooking the capital city. Her phone buzzed with a message from Tanya at the youth center. The kids watched the vote live today. Diego says he's definitely becoming a lawyer now. Maya smiled, remembering the shy teenager who had challenged Robert during his first days at the center. Another message came through, this one from Captain Reynolds, sharing that his department's bridge program graduates had the lowest complaint rates in the force. Justice Williams had told her once that justice was never a destination, but always a journey. 6 months ago, Maya had been kicked to the ground because of her skin color. Tonight, she had watched the president sign legislation that might help ensure fewer people suffered the same fate. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough until no one faced discrimination and violence because of who they were. But it was a beginning, and sometimes beginnings were the hardest part. As the lights of Washington twinkled below her, Maya Johnson, tech billionaire, reluctant activist, bridge builder, felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Not the easy hope of someone who hadn't seen the worst in people, but the hard-won hope of someone who had seen it and still believed in the possibility of change.